Hello. This is a bit more chilled out than the big theatre and the big stage, isn't it? Well, it is for me anyway. I don't know about you. And it's lovely to be back in Tunbridge Wells. But there is part of me, just hearing all of that stuff, that I'm not sure what to make being invited to speak at a conference about failure. Does that mean I'm a success, or does it mean I'm a failure? Or something in between? Who knows? And that's probably a good place to start if we're interested in exploring this subject matter, to get beyond this binary illusion of success and failure as two opposite alternatives. It's an easy way to think about it, but it's a bit overly mechanistic, isn't it? One alternative we seek, one we seek to avoid. What I'm interested in are the infinite shades of grey that exist in reality. And I think that binary way of thinking about it is probably big business as well, which is why it's so popular. Because if we start to get beyond those shades of grey, we see that everyone's experience of success and failure is slightly different. And in fact, we start to see that talking about success and failure as two separate things actually makes everything a bit worse. Because philosophically, at least, success and failure are two sides of the same coin, aren't they? That mutually reinforce each other. We couldn't possibly have any perception of success without a corresponding perception of failure, and vice versa. And if we start unravelling this binary illusion, we come across something really interesting, at least I think so. And that is success and failure, at least as we experience it, is nothing more than a human social construction. And what I mean by a social construction is this, that if all of the human beings disappeared from the planet for a minute, you'll all be all right, you'll all come back afterwards, there would be no success or failure as we experience it as human beings, because it's not a universal law of everything. For those 60 seconds, there would just be the natural to and fro, give and take, unbalancing and rebalancing of all things that sorts itself out in the end, at a universal level. And while I've never interviewed a dog or a crab or a sparrow, I'm sure they don't experience success and failure in the same way that we do. They're just sparrowing or crabbing. I won't say the other one, I just realised what that's going to mean. So that leads me to believe, and what I'd like to explore is this idea that it isn't as binary and as concrete, but success and failure as we experience it is simply a psychological and a social game played by human beings. A game that we were all taught very early on, but we soon forgot that it was a game. And if it is a game, let's just hold that idea for a little bit of time. That leads me to a really interesting line of inquiry. Who's setting the rules of the game, and what's in it for them? And who's reinforcing the rules? And from a totally selfish level, how well am I doing at the game? Am I a success or a failure? Well, I spend most of my time doing stuff where I feel I'm not entirely sure what I'm doing, right on the edge of my experience and knowledge. And much of what I do pays little or nothing. And in fact, if I look at my accounts for the last year, much of it has cost me money. So does that make me a failure as a grown adult? And I still can't eloquently describe what I do. Do you know about this illusion that you have the perfect elevator pitch in case you meet someone in an elevator, I guess? I can't do that. Any of the labels that vaguely fit how I experience myself as an artist or a philosopher or a writer or a speaker just make me feel like an imposter. So I've not been trained or have any qualifications or recognised by any bodies in those areas. So does that make me a failure? And I guess the answer to both of those questions is, well, it depends really, doesn't it? If we're looking at the lens of the game, of what success is in that narrow definition of success, then perhaps I'm a professional failure. Just doing stuff, never quite feeling like I fit in, operating on the edges of the things that I'm interested in, never being recognised by any of the authorities or bodies for doing that. But on the other hand, through a lens that's slightly more blurry and amorphous, maybe I'm a professional outsider. Someone that hasn't been trained in the way that philosophy and art and sociology and all of those things have been done, which means I don't know the rules, which means I accidentally break them every day. So I like to think of myself as the latter, as a professional outsider. Not only because it's much more kinder to myself psychologically, but also because I've come to believe that the outsider plays a really important role in society, particularly in the times we're in now. Times where we're stuck in fixed loops of common sense, where society is over-reliant on the expertise, the experts to come up with answers to get us out of stuff, forgetting that it's those experts that got us into this situation in the first place. So what do? I'll share a little bit. As you've probably worked out, I've got no eloquent way of talking about it, so I'll just share some examples, okay? So I spend most of my time doing projects that are essentially experiments in the opposite of what is normal. the opposite of best practice, the opposite of common sense. I see something established as an answer, I think, I wonder what the opposite would do. Just to do stuff in order to see what happens, and then do some more stuff. And in fact, this is my 10-year business plan that I published at the start of this decade. And I take that very seriously. So I'll give you some examples. A project that I did in 2017, I think this was, probably the year that I spoke at the main event, was called the Imperfect Portrait Experiment. An experiment to start to shake up our idea of what good and bad art is. Now, most of us gave up art, or at least had our confidence dented in art at school when the possibility of failure was introduced. Yeah, you can fail art. I mean, what nonsense is that, eh? And whilst I've managed to recover from my schooling through years of coaching and therapy, artwork, drawing portraits of people as part of my artwork has always been something I've scared of. So I decided to confront this fear of failure and went to London's Trafalgar Square to draw pictures of people that wanted them. And it was terrifying for about the first 10 minutes, but as soon as I saw the looks on people's faces when they received them, the looks of joy and confusion and what the hell is this? That fear of failure started to dissipate a little bit. And some interesting things happened. The parts of my portraiture that I used to regard as art fails, I started to embrace as my own style, my own unique, wonky style. And the other thing that was surprising about this experiment was that people left saying, well, if he can do it, maybe I can do it. He's in Trafalgar Square, he obviously knows what he's doing. Maybe I'll try art again. 2018 experiment was this one, was one that I called Inexpert. Inexpert had the sole objective of doing the opposite of what traditional conferences and learning events are, to disrupt this addiction to quick fix life hacks from experts on stage. The opposite of most conferences, most learning experiences, possibly the opposite of TED, if I'm allowed to say that. I hired a 100-seater London theatre and booked 16 speakers to give talks on subjects they were passionate about but had no expertise or knowledge in. In the foyer of the auditorium, we exhibited some failed art, things that the students of City Lit had donated, like things that had fallen off, things that had gone wrong, and we put ridiculous price tags on them. Even my friend Nick Parker, who'd been learning to play the trumpet for 6 weeks, did all the music for us. And what transpired, the event sold out. And what transpired was an afternoon of confusion, of delight, of laughter, of tears, of joy, of anxiety, of anger, but just something that brought people together. Because there were no experts, there wasn't this status difference between audience and speakers. Everyone was in it together. And because there were no experts, there was no implied answer or superiority. And because there was none of that, there was no failure nor success. And a number of people wrote blogs and articles about Inexpert, but none of them could really describe it other than saying it was an afternoon of being beautifully human together. And one final example is this. It's an ongoing project that's pretty much taken over my life for the last couple of years. It's Sound of Silence, which is the world's first silent podcast featuring special guests. An idea that came to me when I was running, where I just thought, I wonder what the opposite of a podcast is. And there's only 100 episodes going to be broadcast, and each episode involves me sitting with a special guest for 2 minutes and recording it. And this has been a fantastic experiment, and lots of people say, well, what's the point of it? And it's brilliant. If people say that about my work, then I'm on the right track. But it's not always been like this. It used to be far, far easier before I received my mandated state-sponsored education in failure. I think I reached peak wonkiness, peak creativity, probably around about the age of 11, when I was in that sweet spot between primary school and secondary school. And I remember at that age knowing exactly who I was and who I wanted to be. So I was Steve, the bedroom DJ, who used to play my daily radio show and record it on my little tape player. And I didn't care I had no listeners. I didn't care if I played the Rolling Stones, followed by Pinky and Perky, followed by the England World Cup squad. It didn't matter. And not only was I Steve the bedroom DJ, I was Steve the musician. I play these mind-bending Kraftwerk type, even though I didn't know who Kraftwerk were, compositions on my weird battery-powered keyboard. And I could invent chords that didn't exist on my half-size guitar. But the thing I was most proud of was that I was Steve the artist, author and illustrator, creator of a series of short stories about a character called Yappy Dog. And I remember my brilliantly nurturing and supportive primary school teachers used to let me write these stories in class and encourage me to read them to the younger kids, which was such a confidence boost. So in that summer between primary and secondary school, age 11, 12, I remember thinking, this is going to be really exciting. I wanted to develop these superpowers further. So it was a bit of a surprise when I got there and nobody really cared about any of that. In fact, the first lesson I think secondary school taught me was that these were not creative superpowers. These were at best hobbies to be done at the weekend when homework was finished, or at worst, really dangerous distractions, because there's now important work to be done. Subjects such as maths, English and science that were taught in a way that didn't work for a dyslexic lad with a vivid imagination who thinks in patterns and tangents. And then there's the ritual annual humiliation of exams. It's shame-inducing memory tests that I simply wasn't wired to be any good at. My failures calcified in the form of exam grades to hang around my neck for the rest of my life. So having got into secondary school education, knowing exactly who I was and who I wanted to be, I popped out the other end not having a clue to either of those questions and feeling like a complete failure. And I got a job in a factory. And whilst I was grateful to have a job and earn some money, there begins the next phase of the game, the adult version of the game of success and failure, which is much more subtle than the child version, where certain behaviours were rewarded in this narrow definition of success. I get rewarded with promotions. I get rewarded later on with shares and cars and things like that, which arguably isn't any good. But over time, I was letting go of more of this guy here. And the more I let go of who I was, the more of a sense of imposter I felt, the more of a failure I felt. And that took about 15 years until I was sitting in a 40-hour-long therapy group as part of my group development training. So, things don't come obviously to me. I need something like that to snap me out of it. And it was in those 40 hours of like intense personal reflection, I thought, hold on, what's going on here? What happened to this guy? This kid was cool despite his haircut. He didn't care about success or failure. He just did stuff for the hell of doing it. And I'd love to say that that was an epiphany that changed everything, which is sort of supposed to say in these talks, but it was more subtle than that. But in that moment, and then over the next 15, 20 years, a couple of things became really important to me. One was that this, instead of this being an embarrassing photo, an embarrassing time of my life, this guy became my poster child, my hero. Because if I'm going to be like anyone, I might as well be more like me. And that became really helpful, because as the great American designer and artist James Victore says, the things that made you weird as a kid will make you great tomorrow. And that's still a helpful thing for me to hold at heart. And the other thing that gradually became more and more important to me, more so over the last 5 or 6 years, is that I can't be the only one that experienced this rounding off and has this experience of being an outsider. I mean, I'm a white Western man, so there's many places, the majority of places I don't feel like an outsider in. But there must be others that experience this feeling like a slight of outsider. So I want to start a bit of an outsider revolution for those people to bring their beautiful wonkiness for the benefit of society. And I think the manifesto is pretty simple. I think the work of the outsider that society needs at the moment is simply this: to nurture your natural born wonkiness, those things that made you great as a child, that will make you great today, and to find a platform worth tilting. And what I mean by a platform worth tilting is this. Platform and tilt is a technique used in filmmaking and storytelling. That's as simple as this. We begin with a platform. Something happens that tilts that platform. And then we end up with another platform that's subtly different to the original one. So if we use the example of the film Jaws, most of you have probably seen the film Jaws. If you haven't, it's about a big shark that eats people. Apologies if that spoilt it for you all, but it's pretty obvious, yeah? So Jaws works like this. The platform is, there is the beautiful town of Amity. Every day people swim in the crystal clear blue waters without a care in the world. The tilt is this. Until one day, a big shark comes along. And because of that, some people got eaten. Because of that, the mayor of the town panicked. And because of that, he said it was safe to go in the water. And because of that, more people got eaten. And because of that, the chief of police hired a shark hunter and shark expert. And they chased the shark across the sea until they eventually killed it. And the new platform is this. There's a beautiful town of Amity. Every day, people swim in the crystal clear waters, but always under the shadow of the memory of a great white shark. So the new platform is different. And it's the tilt that makes a difference. In fact, I've come to think that the tilt in Jaws may have even been more subtle than that. The tilt in Jaws might have been that there were slight shifts in global sea temperature and currents that caused the plankton and the mackerel to swim a different... So the tilt doesn't have to be something as massive as that. But it's very different. Tilts happen. Tilts is how societal change happens. A little disturbance at the centre of the platform and the routine. But it's very difficult to either see what needs tilting or to know the routine if you're part of the establishment. If you're a part of the established order. And this is where the outsider, because they haven't been trained in the rules of the game, can really tilt stuff either intentionally or accidentally. A brilliant example of that to bring it to life is the story of the Portsmouth Sinfonia. So the Portsmouth Sinfonia was an orchestra that was formed in the 1970s by a group of art students. Anyone could join the orchestra, but the rule was you had to play an instrument you had little or no expertise in. Other than that, the rules were to show up for rehearsals, try your best and don't play deliberately badly. And the results were phenomenal. I'm going to play you a little clip from them. Ladies and gentlemen, Portsmouth Sinfonia. They're not here, but you can clap them. Did you spot the difference? Was that a successful piece of music or a failed piece of music? It's irrelevant. The answer is it's irrelevant. However you experienced it, it did something to you. It either disturbed you, it changed you, it tilted your perception of what classical music could be. The Sinfonia demonstrate this brilliantly. Their natural-born wonkiness was their passionate inexpertise, their instrument. The platform worth tilting, the reason they did it was to disturb a rather elitist and stuck classical music institution. But the other thing it demonstrates in its own small, unique way is what happens if you tilt a platform. Now, this was just the classical music establishment, but they did everything they could to stop the Sinfonia. And do not underestimate the reason why this game keeps everything in check. The reason why the outsiders aren't invited to the table is because they're a threat to the establishment. They're a threat to those that have a vested interest in the game. When we see societal uprisings or revolutions, it tends to be the outsiders that are incarcerated first or silenced. The poets, the orators, the playwrights, the artists, because they move in weird and unpredictable ways. And this happened in the build-up to World War II in Germany, where Hitler started to become very worried about the role that the outsider artists could play in disrupting his propaganda effort. So he asked Joseph Goebbels to do something about it. So Goebbels rounded up all of the works by the dangerous outsider artists. And he also collected works by those incarcerated in psychiatric institutions because they were clinically insane, or the works of murderers and rapists and people that had committed crimes. And he created this exhibition called Et Art Kunst, which means degenerate art, with the sole purpose of saying to the German population, look, these outsiders are as dangerous as these real dangerous people. And I can only assume that that effort somehow worked, given the horrors that unravelled afterwards. But fast forward to 1945, and this guy down here, a Frenchman, middle-aged Frenchman called Jean de Buffet, did exactly the opposite. He decided the works of these outsiders deserved to be exhibited on their own merit. And he scoured war-torn Europe and beyond to find the works of those marginalised by society, those shunned by the art institutions. And he created his Art Brut movement. So I want us, and I want all of us, to take de Buffet's mission further, to stretch it beyond the world of art, maybe a movement that we call Brut Creative, where not only are outsider artists able to exhibit their work, but outsider poets, even outsider politicians, outsider economists. But we can't do any of this if we hang on to this illusion of success and failure, because that's designed to keep everything in check. Now, we can't change that nationally and for everyone, but have a think about your own boundaries, your own, where you're inhibiting your own beautiful wonkiness because of this. Because never in my lifetime have I seen a society so divided, so addicted to expertise and so trapped in these same ways of working. So the time is now. Because as the brilliant outsider himself, Hunter S. Thompson, said, when the going gets weird, the weird turn pro. So outsiders, our time is now. Thank you.